this is the third conversation that we're having on the theme generally of coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a funny theme to try to take on, because that word is such a slippery old word. Boy, does it ever mean different things. So I think we can probably launch in with that. If it's okay with you, I'd love to just sort of read for those who will hear this, some of your background. And then they have a sense of who Ruchira Chaudhary is.
Sure.
So Hindu College in University of Delhi, on NMIMS, INSEAD, University of Chicago. So no shortage of academic pedigree and accolades there. But then this is something that I find interesting, and I'd love you to tell us more about this. 4 years initially as a senior consultant at Hewitt. That's how your career got going. Then TCS, who for the uninitiated is Tata Consultancy Services. And Tata is a huge organization with lots going on, but that was the consulting unit. Commercial Bank of Qatar, the Caffeine Partnership, AIG, and then 7 years at Eye Opener, Institute of People and Performance, and now faculty roles with U Chicago, writing with HBR, and flexing it, head of Asia Pacific, flexing it to the present. So that's a really interesting path. There's a few interesting mile markers along the way. Can you just sort of, I don't know. How do you reflect for a few minutes on that?
You're reading my LinkedIn profile. You clearly don't have a bio like a lot of people do. So that's interesting. I like the approach.
But tell us about that path. I think it'll inform people on how and why you write.
Your choice of words is interesting. Some folks will call it eclectic. I call it a lot of squiggly lines. And that's also what I talk about in my book. It wasn't a straight line path to where I am today. So I did start out, interestingly, in advertising. I spent a couple of years in a leading advertising firm. And the client decided that there was more to what I was doing, and the client offered me a role within their organization, which was Unilever. Mm-hmm. So I went with that. So I worked with Unilever for a bit, and very quickly realized that I wasn't cut out for a sales role. And I was approached by a consulting outfit. It was called Hewitt then. It's now Aon Consulting. It's the world's largest HR consulting firm. And I joined them for several years and ran a practice for them. It was a change in communication strategy consulting practice. A few years later, TCS, which is Tata Consultancy Services, they were going public, and they were looking for individuals who could not just understand the larger components of HR, but also how we could put in place some best practices in the organization design and organization effectiveness space. So it was an interesting time for me. I'd come from this American consulting firm, and I had the opportunity to truly make a difference for, as you said, a really large, big conglomerate, the Tata in the Tata world, TCS. Mm-hmm. And I joined them, helped them with their IPO. Again, I had no idea how an IPO is run. So huge learning for me there. Was part of all their roadshows. We were oversubscribed 7.7 times. So I sort of took a leap at that point and took a lot of the learnings from the people or HR consultancy space to this world. And TCS sort of, I think, was the beginning of a lot of the interesting work I did overseas after that. So during my Hewitt days, I used to run their part of their Middle East outfit. Mm-hmm. So post TCS, my spouse left for the Middle East. And it was a good juncture because I could speak some Arabic. I'd consulted in that world rather extensively. And they were very excited to have me back. Just that in this case, I wasn't a consultant who was flying in and out all the time. So I have to pause and tell you that this could go on. My story is not straight line. It's very eclectic.
Don't pause. Don't go anywhere else. Take us down the serpentine path. Let's go.
2 years in the Middle East, working for Commercial Bank of Qatar, working for Qatar Telecom, which is now called Ooredoo. So learned my Arabic, lived in the Middle East. And then I thought the Middle East chapter was over, and we were moving to Singapore, which is where I've spent the last 15 years in and out. And we landed in Singapore in 2006, and Qatar Telecom, then now Ooredoo, did a massive acquisition, and they called me back. So
Uh,
I spent the next 2 years resident in Singapore, but traveling from Sunday to Thursday to either Doha or any of the affiliates that they had acquired. So I spent my life between Algeria, Tunisia, Kuwait, Dubai. It's just the most fascinating 2 years of my life living in Singapore, but not quite.
your passport stack must be like a brick of used up passport pages.
The only time I actually could enjoy Singapore and I really loved it was every time I had to get my visa to go to Algeria. No matter what nationality you are, everybody needed one.
Yeah.
And Singapore did not have a high commission. So our passports went to Indonesia, which was great because it took 2 weeks and you actually could breathe for those 2 weeks. So yeah, my life has been on a constant spin. And once the post-merger integration ended, I spent a lot more time in Singapore and set up my own firm and did a lot more consulting. Started teaching at the University of Chicago, the Booth School of Business. Started teaching at IMD, SMU, NUS.
What's the classic thing that you teach? If somebody just walked in on an average day when you're at the front lecturing, what are you talking about?
Mostly, it's a larger leadership arena, but I focus on organization design solutions. That could take the form of post-merger integration, as what I do for NUS. I teach a newly minted course called VUCA, right, for SMU. I teach courses like conflict management, negotiation skills, having difficult conversations. So the larger leadership umbrella.
I love those topics. We recently were doing a review of a very classic piece of literature from Xenophon, who's one of the Greek, one of the students of Socrates. And he said Socrates never actually was dealing with lofty and sort of stratospheric ideas, but always really practical stuff. So that Socrates would have led a course called Having Difficult Conversations. and the like, right? As opposed to like generic strategy and things like that. Very cool. When you lecture, how frequently, or when you're teaching rather, that's a better word maybe, how frequently does coaching get incorporated as a concept, or is that really something people need to pick up later?
It's an interesting question. I think I should have answered this question a lot better. I do teach a class called The Leader as Coach. We put it together for the University of Chicago, the Booth School of Business. It's a fairly new phenomenon. And that also led to the book I wrote and all the subsequent literature that I've written on the topic. And perhaps the correct answer is it was subconscious. We talked about elevating others. We talked about good leadership as being not just about financial achievements, but also about your people, your governance, your customers, right? So we talked about it. It was a subset of good leadership. But now, and it's not just because I've written a book, I think the narrative has changed. We say this a lot more explicitly, that you can no longer be a good leader without being a good coach. The pandemic has also shown us that more than ever, it's really about taking your people along in the journey. It's about collaboration and empathy. It's about listening, right? And all of those things are subsets of coaching, at least in my world. Coaching isn't just a conversation that you have with somebody once a quarter across the table in a formal fashion. It's everything you do and everything you say. It's those informal moments when you bump into somebody in the corridor. It's when you're over a Zoom call and you take the time out to understand how somebody's day went. And you give them feedback, when you give them ideas on how they could perhaps have done something differently. All of that is coaching. It's the act of maximizing someone's current performance, but more importantly, future potential through a series of self-enabling and non-directive conversations. That's how I define coaching for a leader.
Okay. So what do you do for, I think one of the problems that we've come across as we've been going through coaching literature and interviewing authors, the definition you just gave is beautifully expansive. So I think for a lot of folks, it'd be like, okay, those are some things I might not have put in the taxonomy of what is coaching. But what do you do to put some fence lines around it so that it doesn't just become everything? It doesn't just suddenly become a catch-all term for all good leadership behavior.
It's a great question. So I wrote this book Right? Coaching, the secret code to uncommon leadership. It
Mhm.
wasn't meant to be a Bible on coaching. It wasn't meant to give you a laundry list of all coaching skills. It was a book on leadership, right? A book that wasn't giving you the code uh, to to being a fantastic coach, but something that's helping you unlock what it takes to be that uncommon leader. And through extensive research and all these interviews, I think we've zeroed down on one thing: the gap between good and fantastic leadership, or good or great leadership, truly
Mhm.
is your ability to elevate others. As you build your empires, it's also about building the people that work with you, that work for you. And that is coaching, right? And
Mhm.
as I said, coaching comes in many ways and forms. So as I started to craft these chapters, I realized that despite being a coach myself, I've done that for a few years now, despite going through a lot of management journals, human resource journals, I couldn't really articulate, even for myself, what coaching does for you. And so I spent a lot of time putting together this model. It's called the Four Cornerstones model, or the
Mhm.
4C+ model, actually, which simplistically tries to identify what you achieve when you coach somebody. So, as a leader coach, if you spend the time and energy coaching somebody, what should the individual truly receive, achieve, or what should the outcomes be?
Mhm.
And I've categorized them into these four cornerstones. The first being clarity, right? Clarity really is about untangling those knots in your head. As leaders, there's so much white noise, there's so much going on in our lives. We have to fight the day to day fires, we have to think about revenue generation, we have to think about people.
Mhm.
Uh, when you get coached by somebody, or when you get coached, the first thing that a coach does for you is give you that clarity.
Mhm.
It's about untangling those knots in your head. And I guess it's not just untangling the knots, it's helping you form distinct patterns. So there is greater clarity in your own head about the way forward. That's the first cornerstone. The second is capability. Um, Coaching is meaningless if you haven't made somebody more capable than he or she was prior to when you started. And that
Mhm.
capability can be achieved in many ways. It's about unleashing those reservoirs of creativity in someone, doing things differently. It's about helping people assemble their career ladders, or giving them, you know, the courage to to explore various ways of hacking your ladder. As I said about my own life, it doesn't have to be a straight line vertical path. It could
Mhm.
have squiggly lines.
Mhm.
Or as Sheryl Sandberg says, was also somebody who's endorsed my book. She called it a jungle gym. That when you take a vertical path to what we define as leadership success, all you see is the backside of the person in front of you. Yeah. So think about your
That's a
life,
good image.
yeah, as a jungle gym where you can go up
Yeah.
and down and you can pause, and think about it as squiggly lines. And
Mm.
success is what you define. It doesn't have to be vertical, it doesn't have to be the size of your teams. So that's the second piece. And of course, capability is also about looking in the horizon. It's not just about today, tomorrow, or the next quarter. It's about building something for the future. And
Mhm.
that's what a good leader coach will help you achieve: thinking forward, thinking into the horizon.
Mhm.
That's the second cornerstone, capability. The third one is what I call consciousness, but it's really another word for self-awareness, right? A good
Yeah.
leader is one who knows his or her strengths, but also knows what he or she could do differently, right? It's about holding a
Mhm.
mirror to yourself and illuminating bits that shine bright, but also understanding that there are areas that you need to focus on.
Mhm.
And the last piece, or the fourth cornerstone, is confidence. And I cannot stress on the importance of confidence, especially when you're coaching women leaders, because all the literature is telling us that despite our capability, our competence, what holds us back is our confidence to move forward, to surge ahead,
Mhm.
right? When we get these fabulous roles, our first reaction is we question ourselves. Am I good enough? Was
Mhm.
it an accident? So it's not, it's this whole business of nature versus nurture. And it could happen to anybody. In fact, more and more research tells us that the more successful you are, you're constantly plagued by self-doubt about,
Yes.
this is truly something that has come to you because of your, your, because you're capable, or because it's an accident. We call it the imposter syndrome. So clarity, capability, consciousness, and confidence are those 4 cornerstones that I talk about. And I do say that this can all come alive if you're in an organization that has a culture that truly wants to build an ecosystem where you can give
Yes.
feedback, but also receive feedback. You
Yes.
can't expect these cornerstones to, fit into this little jigsaw and everything can come alive until you truly permeate a culture where coaching is the norm.
Yeah. So you have a whole section. In fact, arguably, there's just threads that run all the way through on culture. So as an organization, Sage's reason for existence is we come alongside other organizations and help them build an academy. Well, there's an unspoken, what would you call it? Almost like a metaphysics underneath something practical like an academy.
Sure.
Which is, do you even believe in this stuff? Are you even are your values even aligned to this? What are you doing something like that for? So we could loosely call that culture. But coaching is many things. I mean, you just touched on what was quite an expansive definition that I see you have pretty fixed ideas with your 4C plus. But culture is another thing altogether. It's like, can you just bootstrap out of nowhere and suddenly people are having deep and meaningful exchanges among each other on consciousness and clarity and confidence. So how do you, when you think about an organization in sort of, we'll call it like a state of nature, Ruchira, they just, maybe they have some of this in them, maybe they don't, but culture is this missing piece where they're going to have to start the behavior somewhere. They're going to have to take a baby step. Maybe just speak to that leader who says, look, we're not against it. We're not great at it, but we got to start somewhere. There's no fixed culture of coaching here.
True. I think it's a fantastic observation, and I guess a question for me. Culture is the missing link, right? When we say we want a coaching organization, what it boils down to is people, right? So Kevin is someone who naturally believes in elevating others, building his teammates. So he will focus his time and energy on doing that. Ruchira may not be somebody who is intrinsically motivated to build others. So at the end of the day, it's about people. And if you have a leader that walks the talk, is a role model, that constantly talks about the value of coaching, yes, I think it's a great one, but that's not enough. You can give across the board training to all your managers on coaching skills. Fantastic. You can constantly talk about what coaching can do for those that you lead, but also for yourself, right? When you make other people capable, when you give them clarity and confidence, you narrow the capability gap between yourself and those that work with you, giving you more time to focus on your strategic years, right? So coaching is not a one-way street. You help somebody become better than they are today, but you become better in the process, right? When you shine the light on them, you shine brighter. That's the whole premise of leader as coach. So all of those things, great. If you buy into it and you coach your folks, fantastic. But let's face it, that's not enough. Not everybody will do all of these good things just because we think we tell them to, or we talk about the virtues. Organizations need to embed coaching into the DNA of the organization if they're truly serious about it. If they want to constantly build the next line of leaders, and if they constantly believe that regardless of the size of their teams or their titles, every leader should be building more leaders, then you need to consciously embed it into the cultural fabric. We went into the cultural fabric of your organization. And you do that in a few ways, right? You do the training, you constantly talk about the importance of coaching, you are the perfect role model, but there's more, right? You need to embed it in your formal and your informal systems. So let me give you an example. When you hire people in organizations, think about not just the pedigree or the experience or the fantastic business schools that they come from or the organizations they come from. Think about attitude. If you want your leaders to be future leaders and coaches, then think about, are they collaborative? Will they take others along in the journey? So focus on those elements more than just where they come from in terms of organizations or past experience. When you evaluate these same set of managers, think about not just the revenue generation, think about not just, all the fantastic sales numbers, but also think about, have they built other people? If you have engagement scores, are you tracking them? So think about ways in which if you truly want to embed this culture, you need to be serious about external mechanisms to track that. Is it an explicit question in your performance appraisal, right? So all of those things matter. But of course, to ensure that all this comes alive, you have to make room for people to grow in the organization. You need people to be more self-assured that if they coach those that work with them, there will be room for them to grow either sideways or upwards.
Yeah.
To take away that insecurity as well.
So would you rather see an organization engaging external coaching talent to the extent that they can't just start, Tuesday we didn't have any coaching culture, but look at Wednesday, we're just rocking, right? It's not going to happen. Is your thought and advice in your experience that they should engage external coaches to prime the pump and begin that culture? Or is it more like, well, look, just take a couple of training courses on how to coach, what it is, begin to inculcate the actions, and the actions will instill the values? What do you think when you consider how people get started?
It's a good one. I mean, I don't know if I didn't think of it as a particular sequence. I think getting external coaches is a good idea. It's a great idea. I mean, people like me do that for a living. But I just would say that be very thoughtful about when you engage an external coach and why you're engaging them. The why has to be important, because a coach cannot be a crutch, right? A coach can come in for a short burst of time. Coaches come in when there's a change in business strategy, when there's transformation, when the system is changing in some form or fashion, new leadership, mergers, acquisitions, or transition times when you're a senior leader, getting promoted, and you think it's a good time for them to have this non-judgmental sounding board. Best to get somebody from the outside, or the board appoint somebody for the CEO. Yes, fantastic times. But I think you need to be very clear about why you're hiring the coach and what you'll get out of the coach. Yes, bring in the coach to kickstart this process, absolutely, but be very clear on your deliverables, that you're bringing the coach to coach your coaches, which is your leaders. So kickstart that culture, but that's not enough. You need to do all the right things, as I said earlier. Make sure that your leaders are those role models, that they walk the talk, that they are fantastic coaches themselves, that we talk about and we laud the success stories of those that have built others. And again, I do have to reiterate that you need to find a way to embed that eventually in your formal and your informal systems. There's an interesting model that I refer to in my book. It's called the ARC model. So the architecture of the organization, which is really your performance management, the way you're structured, how communication flows, etc. That's the architecture, all the formal stuff. The R in the ARC stands for routines. Your day-to-day, processes, how you promote people, how you hire them, how you communicate, are you formal, are you informal? That's the R. And the C, of course, stands for culture, something that you and I are familiar with. The tingly feeling when you walk into an organization, or the way things are done around here. So in order to really, really make coaching a reality in your organization, think of embedding coaching in the arc of your organization, the architecture, the routines, and the culture to make it alive.
There's going to be a lot of people who are attracted to the concept of coaching, and I think they're going to pick up that thread where you just said as a crutch, right? They're going to go, coach, I could totally use a coach. I'm, sometimes I get angry and I blow up at my people. I need a coach, right? Or they're going to go, actually, who needs a coach is my worst performing sales idiot. That person needs a coach, right? So I think maybe additional words from you could be very helpful. And by the way, I think this about a number of people who write about coaching because they've been in it for a while, so it seems assumed. Can you just go back and say a few more words about like that, why you engage one in the first place? Because I know from firsthand experience setting up academies that coach is thought of in the athletic frame a lot of times. Can you say a few more words about the idea of the why? Why do you get a coach?
Um, I think coaching, getting a coach, somebody, as I said earlier, who can help you maximize not just your current performance, but also your future potential, give you that clarity, capability, um, bridge that confidence if there is a gap at all. And of course, help you become more self aware or more conscious, as I say. I think many, many good reasons to bring a coach, people like us. But be very thoughtful about when you bring a coach. And in my mind, there are a few junctures in an organization or an individual's life cycle when I think a coach is most beneficial.
Mhm.
I think these coaching interventions should be short bursts. The definition of short varies. Could be a year, could be 6 months, could be 2 years. I guess I started by saying don't make the coach a crutch, because in the end, you have to own your challenges, and while you can get the guidance and the direction, you have to own these problems.
Mhm.
So get the guidance, get someone to be the sounding board, get someone to be there for you. But in the end, this cannot be a permanent solution.
Right.
Right. And so the junctures that I feel are the ideal junctures to bring in a coach. So first things first, if you're the senior most person in an organization, please get a coach. Definitely get a coach, because while I encourage every leader to be a coach, those that are at the top of the pyramid get the least feedback,
Mhm.
because just the way the pyramid is, right? And the more senior we are, somehow there is this illusion or impression that we don't need feedback because we know it all. We've been there, we've done it. We run regions or we run business units, but that is really far from being the truth, because the more senior we are so starved for getting good feedback. So
Mhm.
please ensure you find the right coach, whether you find that coach in your boss or you engage an external coach. Please seek that coach, seek
Mhm.
that individual who can be unbiased and non-judgment.
Mhm.
As you go down the line, as you move from your middle to senior management, I think it's a fantastic juncture again as you're transitioning into that role, because the way you approached business and work has changed. Good time to bring in somebody who
Mhm.
can be that sounding board. And while I again encourage having leaders at every level to be coaches, sometimes it helps to get perspective which is unbiased, which is external. And these coaches often come with ideas. They've worked in other industries. They can bring in
Mhm.
some best practices. And let's face it, sometimes you cannot open up about everything to your boss. So good idea to get these coaches. Bring in coaches when your organization is going through any kind of upheaval or change. You're also caught up in doing everything else. And often people are going through so much trauma and they don't quite understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Again, bring in people when there's turbulence in the system. Do that as well. Bring in coaches to coach your coaches. And I think you mentioned that earlier. When you're kickstarting a coaching initiatives, or you want more of your managers to embrace those coaching skills,
Mhm.
bring in coaches and do some skill transfer. And I think
Mhm.
these are good opportunities. And bring them in at any other point as well, but be clear about why you bring it. I think the objective needs to be very well defined, and
Mhm.
also your deliverables.
So, like a semi-technical piece of that, right? Think about the last two coach authors that we spoke to. One exclusively writing about sales coaching,
Mhm.
and so the subject matter, the methodology, the keywords, the jargon, even the default settings for like what are the goals, the processes, et cetera, going to be around the sales portion of an organization versus, say, I don't know, strategy, leadership, consulting, HR, like all kinds of other business units. And then that was with Corey Bray. And then with Karim Hirani, his observation was there are certain uniform features of excellent coaching where you don't have to obsess about just the perfect match. And
Mhm.
instead, you can just let any good qualified coach that knows what they're up to, they know the craft, pretty much match with anybody. It's very rare in his experience to get a mismatch, so long as you have that taken care of. Those pull different directions, right? So I think people will be sitting on the precipice of saying, I ought to get a coach in here, and they'll be stalled out by confusion on, wait a minute, do I need somebody who really knows a SaaS business intimately? I think I do. Well, or do I need somebody who's specific in sales to help the sales folks, or in marketing for the marketing folks? So in your research and experience, do you need a coach that looks just like your problem, or can you just find anybody who's great at the craft?
I think so. I think the latter.
The
Well,
latter.
I've coached folks across oil and gas, ITES, financial services. Currently, I do a lot of work in the not-for-profit sector,
Hmm.
social impact. So I can't say I'm a domain expert in any of those, right?
Mhm.
I think you have to be very clear about the objective. One, the idea is to make the person become a better version of himself or herself. So you have to broad base that. And the second is, I do think that it's just a personal sort of recommendation and something that's worked for me, is that ensure there's good chemistry. Unless you trust your coach, unless you respect your coach, unless you like each other, the coaching relationship doesn't go forward. So do make the time to spend that 45 minutes, an hour with your coach before you really sign off with the person. To believe that this is the person I want to, share my life with or not, right?
Okay, so that now I have to ask you about two very important words in your book, which pull against each other: tough and love. Not tough love, but tough and love, because obviously somebody who wasn't ready for it could be turned off by the style of a coach, and yet you talk in the book about the importance of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the chapter, the genesis of that is that I did want people not to think about coaching as this fuzzy and amorphous exercise, because so often I come across people say, but he's very direct, very cut and dry, and this individual wants for us to work. Now that's fine. I do need to emphasize that coaching is not just about being all nurturing and caring. At the end of the day, the idea is to make somebody better than they are today, right? It's about making them a better version of themselves. And that can come in many shapes and forms. Different coaches adapt different styles, but a good coach will also use a nuanced approach in keeping with the larger organizational cultural context, but also the individual that he or she is coaching, right? You have to adapt yourself. And there's nothing wrong with tough love coaching. In fact, a lot of leaders will tell you that because this one was constantly rapping me on my knuckles and saying, what happened to that plan that we thought we would have ready? It's not ready. You think we're going to make it to the next quarter if the plan's not ready? So some of us need that kind of constant, I won't use the word badgering, but we need that rap on the knuckles. We need that somebody telling us, dude, you've got to buck up. You have to do this. You have to pull up your socks. But the one thing, whether it's an external coach or it's somebody who's, your manager, it has to come from a place of love. That's why tough love. You can be tough with somebody, but you have to make it explicitly clear that you're doing this because you want this person to shine even brighter than they are today. And so these same individuals can be either cut and dry or very stern, but the same individuals will also be the ones that will take you out for lunch. They'll grab that cup of coffee, have a drink with you. It's not their persona to be nasty or rude. Remember that. If they're being tough on you, it's because they really want you to become better than you are today.
If you come across people, say in leadership in an organization, and they're just taking on coaching as almost like a way of working, a way of leading, how do you help them navigate that? So that seems like it maybe flows out of the fullness of their heart as they are, right? So you can't just walk in and be like, by the way, I need you to have tough love. And they're like, okay, great, I got it. Thanks, Ruchira, I'm on it. But it takes some kind of development of that balance, right? Because some people are just really great at the tough bit, and some people are really great at the love bit and completely lacking the other pan of the balance. So you're referencing these sort of cultural title shifts where an organization could take on a coaching culture, but surely that happens down at the individual level.
And absolutely,
where John or Jane, who don't have it in their nature to be tough, suddenly need to learn the way.
Or sometimes the John and Jane are rather tough and they find it hard to be nurturing.
Show any love.
I've talked about my ex-boss, actually. I checked with her and she was okay. She was my client and at Medtronic, and we're really good friends. But Lorraine was like that with me, and she would. I found it very intimidating. Somebody like me who was not typically speechless. She would just, I remember those early days, Singapore, new office. She would just corner me in the corridor and say, so Ruchira, what do you think about this new technology? And she would do this often with other people. And I was new to the organization. It was really awkward for me. This was medical devices. I didn't know the first thing about it. I was hired to do a large post-merger integration exercise for them, or she would do it in front of the regional CEO, or just volunteer my services to somebody who was walking by, saying she could help you with it. And I found it very stressful. So then I finally talked to her. I said, Lorraine, you've hired me to be this sort of consultant, but I find this. I didn't use the word intimidating. I find it very awkward because, she says, why do you think I'm doing this? Because you'll go back, you'll learn more about our business, you will understand the domain better. I'm doing this because I really want you to be more visible than you are today. I want Bob, who is the Asia Pacific CEO, to know you better.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to meet with the customers. I don't want you to be this invisible person behind the scenes helping us. And so she was all tough. And with some coaching on this end,
Mm-hmm.
I think she also acquired the softer edges. So I think we found that balance. It wasn't just about me. She would do it to a lot of other people. It was just her style. But she meant well. And she's lovely. She wanted to take people out. She wanted to look after them. But then she would, transform into this individual who was constantly saying, okay, so tell me about the numbers. Tell me about this. So I think there was a process of learning at both ends. And we see that all the time.
I think usually, in my experience, when that stuff is rooted in a good spirit, people are always thankful for those characters. Probably not real time, not in the moment. They're not thankful. Not when you get my favorite phrase is voluntold. You get voluntold what to do and who to help. That's not maybe the moment, but usually after people sing praises of those kinds of folks.
Absolutely. I mean, we got over that, and we're great friends, and we got to a stage where I could give her feedback. So again, back to that culture of coaching. A good leader coaches are those that when they give feedback, they appreciate when they get it back. And you have to keep, leave your ego at the door, because you have to, if you truly want to be that role model, that you should also be seeking feedback, not just giving it to people. And you have to be open to what you receive, assimilating the bits that you think you can change.
I think you're going to be able to field this question a little better than we've had so far. Not criticizing other folks. It's a tricky question. But you mentioned sprints or, fixed periods of time. You said short, and short can be really vary. Sometimes it's 3 months or a year or whatever.
Yeah.
When is coaching done? So we know, I think everybody has a bit of a hint as to when it starts. Right? Need is identified and you get a feeling, and eventually you pick up the phone and dial someone and you start asking who can do this for you. When's it done?
I don't think it's really done. It's a continuum. But if you're a leader coach, it's never done. You have to constantly coach. That becomes part of who you are. That's part of your leadership repertoire, right? Mm-hmm. It's a subset, or as I said, part of the leadership repertoire. It's not something you do in addition to being the leader, right? It's not the added burden. It is part of being a leader. When you engage an external coach, you have to decide when the right time is right. There is a fixed funding organizations have. So a lot of CEOs will have coaches for a long time. The frequency at which they meet their coaches varies. When they feel they're ready to do more on their own, they will see their coaches a lot less than they used to in the early days.
Okay.
And so that's one way of thinking about it. But as you go down the line, it could vary. It could be 6 months, it could be a year, it could be 2 years. So my current example, I work for this large German organization, and I coached the entire leadership team. And the coaching was once a month for about a year. And I felt they were ready. So we paused, but come COVID, they all wanted to have more conversations. It was, the world as we knew it had changed. And the organization then brought me back in the second year. We did a lot more Zoom, and, and as the world opened up, I started seeing them. And I think, again, they're all in a good place now. So you can revisit it. You can go back to it. But again, coaching is done when you think you're ready, if you engage an external coach. But for a leader coach, it's never done.
Okay.
It's what you do all the time. every single day of your life.
Okay, that I think is going to be really instructive for folks, because as they, tiptoe into the waters of, hey, should I pay somebody what objectively can be a lot of money to do something which objectively can be very difficult to measure?
Right.
And they're like, I don't know, what do I just start? And then one day I have to fire them because I just say enough of this, like we're done? Or do I just say, you do this until our sales reach the right number, or my people give me positive feedback scores, or what? People, I think, as leaders or organizations look down the barrel of, okay, coaching, I'm hearing a lot about it, we ought to do it, they're going to be hit by trepidation and hesitation and confusion in a lot of areas, not least of which is they can see instinctively it's easy to get going. How and do we end ever? Or are we just going, do we just need to open a permanent budget line and time and
No,
time cost to just do coaching all the time?
No, I don't think you do.
So I think your answer there will be instructive, that like it's done when it's served its purpose.
Yes. And as a leader, you'll know that you're a lot more confident, you have a lot more clarity, you're able to think for yourself. And again, I encourage a lot of leaders, at least in my own relationship, is even if your engagement is ended, you can still pick up the phone and call somebody who is once upon a time a trusted advisor. That occasional conversation. I don't think somebody's going to send you a bill. Stay in touch with your coaches. Let them be a sounding board. If once in 6 months you just want to call them, give them an update, I think you should. And that's the kind of coach you should engage.
I should share something with you that you can do with as you please. But a lot of the DNA of my organization is in sales and business development, mainly for professional services. So think, consulting firms and law firms and accounting firms and the like. There is a school of, let's say, theory or practice that is taking over business development, which is called sense making. And it bears some of the same highlights from your 4C, not all of them, but clarity is a massive one. So this casts the role as that business development professional who in a law firm, say, it just isn't called a salesperson or a BD person, they're called a senior partner. But it casts them in the role to achieve the task of help that client achieve clarity on their decision, rather than persuade them to go with, your law partnership. Rather, they have a tricky question to answer, which is, should I or shouldn't I engage legal services at all? And if so, with whom and how big and what size? And so this school of thought is, it's actually the job of the person selling to coach them through the process, rather than with clever maneuvers and persuasive language and so forth, guide them to the decision that would serve them best, but rather that the kind of coachee would serve best. I don't think that they're doing confidence. I don't think that that's part of the game so explicitly. I don't think that they're doing consciousness quite so explicitly, but that clarity is absolutely, I think, becoming a huge part of that conversation. The reason you made me think of it was you mentioned trusted advisor as a key word, and clearly that is something that the two things share in common: a coach and some person who needs to just guide you through a complex purchasing decision.
Survey after survey, and HBR does these rather frequently. They'll ask the leader, do you think of yourself as a coach? And invariably the answer is yes. When you decode this and you go deeper, you realize that most managers think they're fantastic coaches and the reality is very different. Really? And that's because we think we're coaching when what we're really doing is telling people what to do. Coaching is all about asking, a lot like what you described. You ask the right questions in the Socrates style, right? That's how it came about. These are open-ended questions. So you're not telling people that this is what made me successful. Hey, this is my playbook. You should go do that. You ask them powerful, open-ended questions to trigger their thinking. And that's what good coaching is. It's asking, not telling, much like what you talked about. And so, because through our educational system, our school, college, business school, wherever we've been, the emphasis has always been on answers, on anybody. The best students were those that had all the answers, right? And as good managers, we think it's our job to solve people's problems. So when someone's stuck, we tell them what to do. This is how you do it. Oh, by the way, I had done this last year. It was fabulous. You should just do this. So we take away the ability for people to think for themselves. Coaching is all about asking. Coaching is all about helping people think for themselves. And that's how you unleash the creativity, the innovation, those inventing career ladders. That's what it is. And I think that's the key difference. And that's what gets missed, because we think we're helping people. We block time in our diaries. We talk to them about career aspirations. We ask them how we can help you. But then we don't really help them because we tell them what to do. And that's the difference. It's the asking versus telling phenomena that we need to embrace as leaders.
Do you think that they think that misapprehension comes from the athletic coach? Because certainly that's a very common use of the same word, coach. And if you have somebody teaching you how to throw a jab and a left hook, and all they do is do Socratic questioning, it's not very helpful. So that's a paradigm where you kind of want somebody to say, you want somebody to tell you precisely what to do.
Yeah, except that narrative is also changing, right? There is a way of doing things, as we call flexibility in a framework. But there's also research that's telling us that every athlete is different, right? Depending on whichever sport you're playing. Your own body and how these neurons connect to the different parts reacts differently. So you have to find the perfect balance, whether it's, I don't know, the javelin throw that you're doing, or how your foot's connecting to the soccer ball. Increasingly, they're saying you find your own path. That's a goal. Right? That's a given. But this is how you get there. These are the constructs. These are the principles. But there is no one way of achieving it. And increasingly, sports coaches are adhering to that. And in the erstwhile scenario, we told people what went wrong. But now what we do is, rather than showing them clips of what went wrong or analyzing that, the school of thought is show them moments where they did a fabulous job. So go back to the bits that made them super successful and say, think about this clip and think about what you did differently here. And can you try and replicate that? So this whole narrative around coaching is also changing dramatically. Our goalpost is clear, but our destination is clear, but the path to getting there can be more customized or bespoke.
Wow, that's super interesting. I have never, as I said, our job is academy building, and the metaphors of sports and battle never seem to run dry. People are always fascinated by those, no matter, they don't seem to run out. But it's very interesting to hear you say that if those are source metaphors, those metaphors themselves may be subject to a lot of review, their own evolution, and then can inform. That's very interesting. And instinctively, just when you say it, immediately I can kind of register from a sports arenas that's true.
Yeah, you just read my book. It's all there.
On that note, by the way, people will, whenever we do these interviews, people want to get in touch with the authors. Either they just want to buy the book and read it, or they want to have a chat, or they want to have those authors come and say a word or two.
Sure.
They're, one leader or the organization and so forth. So how should people track you down? You're no longer, staying 2 days in Tunisia and then 3 days in Marrakesh and then 4 in Qatar and so forth. How do people find you, get in touch with you, Ruchira?
I'm on social media. They can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me on my website. There's an email to send me. It's ruchirachaudhary.com. And I'm between Singapore, India, and sometimes a few other countries. I'm usually very responsive. But between the website, which is my name.com, and LinkedIn, I think those would be the two easiest avenues of reaching out.
Okay, well, super. You have a lot of pots
there
on the stove. Oh yes, please hold it up. Yeah, hold it up and hold it still so we can catch it.
So that's clarity, right? And that's how we started when we were designing the book cover with Penguin. That's a big knot in your head, and it untangles and unravels. And that's where the challenge was. My wonderful designers at Penguin would just stop there. And it was a hard time explaining to them that a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist can help you untangle the knots. What a good coach does is makes you go higher and makes you shine brighter. So it's not just untangling, it's forming those distinct patterns. It's making you become better than you are today, making you shine brighter and making you go even higher than you are today.
It's a great visual. It's a great visual. I like the color blue too. That kind of azure. That's super. That's on Amazon. Yeah, people can just grab it there.
Globally available on Amazon. If you're based in anywhere in Southeast Asia, you can always pick it up at a bookstore as well.
Excellent.
If you're in Singapore at Kinokuniya, I have a big stack of signed copies. So,
well, lovely.